I was looking for a new research area because I felt like the internet might be sticking around.
The following is a conversation with Dr. Don Heider. He is the chief executive of the Markkula Center for Applied Ethics at Santa Clara University, having done decades of research. Get ready for a mind-bending episode. Today, I would like to welcome Dr. Heider to the podcast. He has, I think you've mentioned, you've had 21 years of experience in the space of tech ethics alone. Ignoring all your other past experience that I'm sure that you've had, you're currently the executive director at the Markkula Center of Ethics at Santa Clara University. So yeah, I'm excited to talk to you about specifically tech ethics. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, happy to be here. Happy to talk to you about this.
Yeah. Usually I like to start off with a bit of an icebreaker.
Okay.
So my first question is what's your earliest kind of childhood memory, vivid memory of you getting into tech or getting into, your field of interest when you were younger?
Well, this is really old.
Hmm.
When I was young, very young, there there was not color TV.
Okay.
And so my grandparents, my father's mother and father, got a color TV, and they were really early. Like nobody in our neighborhood had a color TV. And so I remember us driving over there on a Sunday night to watch Bonanza, which was this old Western show, and it was the number one show, I think, on television right then. And it started with a map and then a branding iron sort of burning a hole through the map. And then that sort of cut away to see the family riding horses, all the father and his sons. Anyway, but to see that, first of all, to see a peacock, it was on NBC, to see a peacock in color on your television, and then to see that the color of the flames, and then the
Mhm.
cowboys, it was just seemed absolutely stunning. And
Yeah.
so think about going from there to where we are now. It's unbelievable, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, the fact that you also remember that so vividly just
Oh, yeah.
speaks volumes to, yeah. I mean, yeah, like you said, the progress of tech is kind of crazy. It's more than
Yes.
exponential. Yeah. But I guess for my first real question, I'd like to talk about kind of what got you into the field of tech ethics. And since you do have so much expertise, what exactly is tech ethics for those who don't know?
Yeah, well, I was a professor at the University of Texas at Austin at the time, and I was looking for a new research area because I felt like the internet might be sticking around.
You had a
And
hunch.
yeah, I just had this gut level feeling. And so, but I looked at a lot of stuff on the internet. I looked at websites, I looked at blogs, I looked at, you know, and I found it all very boring and not very research interesting, not interesting
Mhm.
enough to devote a year or two researching. And then I read an article in the paper about an architecture professor at UT Austin who was taking her classes into a thing called Second Life, which was a virtual world. And I found that very weird because architects already used um, computer programs to draw buildings. So, what was the point of going into a virtual world? And she explained in the article that architecture is about more than buildings, it's about space and how people interact with space. And so, students would build a building and then invite other avatars to come see it. And then they would pay attention to where they went in the building, what the traffic flow was, which you can't do on a 3D architecture program, right? And
Mhm.
so I found that very intriguing. So I signed up, and it's free to go into Second Life. It's actually owned by a company called Linden Labs, which is in San Francisco here. And
Oh.
what I found was this company had built a virtual world like, it looked like earth, grass and the ground, and it had a sky, and it had gravity, and they really had left it completely up to people joining to figure out what to do. So there wasn't like a video game where you went in and you had to do this or that to level up, or there was any kind of objective. They just left it up to people. And so as I started traveling around in the world, I saw very interesting, vibrant communities doing all sorts of weird and interesting things. And so for me, a media sociologist, somebody who is interested in human beings and how they react, how they interact with media, this was sort of a new form of media. And it was just irresistible as a researcher because you basically given people this tool and said to them, do whatever you want. And they were. And so I found that fascinating. So tech ethics is basically, thinking about how technology affects human beings and for good or bad, and how humans use that technology in good ways and in bad ways. And the reason it's interesting and newish, people have been doing tech ethics for now 2 or 3 decades, is that technology raises often new questions that we hadn't thought about before. So, for instance, in Second Life, there was no code of ethics for behavior on the internet, let alone a virtual world. And so that was very interesting to me to see how people treated each other, how they interacted. And then eventually, after I'd been there for a while, I was part of a community that had a big ethical issue, and no one could decide what to do about it. And there were everybody had an opinion, but they didn't really know what to do. And so that really struck me that we were going to need ethics in this new world because of these new, interesting, complicated situations that technology often allows.
Hmm. Yeah, and which year was this with the Second World creation?
Well, Second Life was created, I think you could look it up on Wikipedia or something. I think it was launched 21 years ago. So
Wow.
I
Okay.
I joined about 9 months or a year after it was launched, so pretty early. And
Hmm.
I'm still there, and I'm actually launching a new research project with a colleague in Switzerland. But I've done 2 or 3 studies in there, and I find it to be still super interesting and compelling.
Yeah, I mean, that's fascinating. The way that you mentioned that there's also no real rules in this world. So, like you said, there were vibrant communities. Like, I guess tell me more about what exactly you saw in the Second Life.
Yeah, so I mean the rules they have to do with you know, like pedophilia and gambling. They do
Hmm.
have rules, but that's about it. And
Yeah.
you can't harass somebody. But they're pretty laissez-faire. So what I found was, you know, there were, for instance, there were a number of groups that had come to Second Life from MUDs. I don't know. Do you know what a MUD is?
No.
Okay. So, in the early days of the internet, people would get online together in a sort of chat room or a room. They called them MUDs because that's short for multi-user dungeon. And you can tell by the name of it, this is sort of a fantasy thing. Like people would get
Mhm.
on, like 20 or 30 people in one spot, and then they would start making up stories. And so the story would be like, you're in a dungeon of a castle, it's dimly lit, blah, blah, blah. And then each person would say, I'm a prince, I'm an elf, I'm whatever. And then they would sort of interact with each other, sort of role playing, right? But
Mhm.
they were doing it completely in text, which is kind
Wow.
of remarkable and creative if you think about it.
Yeah.
And there weren't just, people in sort of recreating medieval times. There were other groups as well doing all sorts of things. And so Second Life launches, and it's like, wow, we can do this and actually make a dungeon. Make something that has walls, and we can have avatars that have costumes and look like ogres or giants or elves or so it was very appealing. And so there are all these what I call sub communities in Second Life. There were communities of people who were fascinated by elf and elf lore and elf literature, right? And it was the first time I'd ever heard of a furry, and so there still are very vibrant communities of people who like to role play as animals. But again, in a much more convincing way, I'd say than real life. Uh, because you know you can literally live as a squirrel or a rabbit or anything else if you want to, right? And so there was also a mainstream Second Life where people would get together and socialize. There were dance clubs, there still are. And so all of it was interesting to me, you know, as a sociologist. And so I spent the first year just living in as many communities as I could, living, you know, like signing on and spending an hour or two,
Hmm.
just to observe and see what was going on and why they were trying to understand why they were doing it and what the appeal was and what it meant to them as humans, right? Why spend your time doing this? Why not watch TV or go to a movie or do something else, right?
Hmm.
So I found it a very rich environment and yeah, with lots going on and lots of different communities.
Yeah. I mean, what were your findings? Like, what were some of the reasons why people chose this activity to bond with others?
Well, the first study I did was I was very interested in why people made avatars that look the way they did.
Hmm.
So that I spent you know months just asking people, why does your avatar look the way it does? Which sounds like a kind of not very interesting question, but it actually is because it has everything to do with your identity online. And Second Life offers you, I don't know how many video games you've played, but you know, if you play a video game, you can have different kinds of avatars, but it's somewhat limited, right?
Hmm.
You can buy and get better costumes for it and but really it's not a huge range of choices often. In Second Life, there are endless choices. I mean, honestly, there are millions and millions of different looks you can give an avatar. It's actually a whole cottage industry within Second Life. And so, given that, like one of my early friends in Second Life, she was a visual artist from the UK. She always, most of the time, she was a set of spinning boxes.
Wow, that's
So,
an option.
but that just shows you how diverse it was. There were
Yeah.
dragons, there were people who lived as all sorts of things. So, the question of why does your avatar look like it does, you know, I found very interesting. And what I found is, aside from these sub communities, the the people had created avatars that look like they did in real life, which again,
Uh,
kind of surprising and kind of not surprising. The
mhm.
surprising part is, geez, you could be anything. You could be a purple person who's
Yeah.
20 feet tall. Why would you look like you do? Well, this is sort of your representative in this world. And so, and most people in Second Life in those days were over 25. And by the age of 25, you sort of come to terms with your physical appearance in the real world. And so it sort of makes sense to make an avatar that generally resembles what you look like. So that was my first result. And then I went on to study, you know, more about people's relationships. But why people are there, I have an overarching theory that I've never written. I need to
Hmm.
write a book about Second Life, but the reason they're there, and by the way, the people who are in Second Life have changed over 20 years. So, and there have been groups of immigration where people have come and anyway,
Yeah.
it's interesting. I mean, imagine living in any community for 20 years, you'd see a lot of change, right?
Hmm.
So, but the one thing that has stayed, remained the same over 20, 21 years, however long I've been there, is people are there to get some need met that they aren't getting met in real life.
Okay.
So, for instance, if they want to skydive and scuba dive and surf, and they can't because they live in Ohio, I guess they could skydive, but it'd be harder to scuba dive and then they can do it in Second Life. I mean, there are hundreds of different activities. If you want to go to a club every night and dance with your friends, you can. And which is, you know, most of us can't do because we have jobs and can't stay up all night. So it might meet a social need for you. You
Hmm.
might be able to build relationships in a way that you find difficult in real life. And it's all anonymous, which also means you know, you can sort of let your hair down a little bit, you know.
Yeah.
It sort of gives you permission to experiment and try different identities if you want. And so I think that's very appealing to people. But overall, people are there usually because there's some need, whether it's emotional or psychological, that isn't being met in real life that they can get met here.
Yeah. I think it's interesting you mentioned that, obviously for safety reasons and other reasons that most of these people are over 25, but in similar, I guess, gaming scenarios, it's usually children who don't have like these emotional needs met. So it's interesting because I feel like, yeah, there are a lot of negative impacts that could come out of digital worlds and things like that, aside
Well,
from the
I
positive.
agree 100%. And one of the most disturbing things right now are chatbots that allow children to participate.
Mm,
And, um, so they sort of have this virtual friend, but of course
yeah.
it isn't a friend and it isn't a human. And in many cases, these companies have not put up proper guardrails or safety features to protect children. Second Life initially, at some point, built a teen grid, but I think you still had to be 14. It was like 14 to 18, or
Okay.
14 to 21. But I think you have to be 21 to be in Second Life now, and there is no teen grid anymore.
Oh, got it. Okay, that makes sense.
But to me, the chatbots are much more can be. I mean, you have to be careful of predators every place and people who manipulate people. That happens every place, right?
Hmm.
But chatbots, especially ones where the company has done nothing to try to protect children, to me, it's much more disturbing and nefarious, honestly.
Yeah. I mean, I know there was one interesting situation with character AI, which is, like you were mentioning, a chatbot type thing, with issues surrounding like suicidal
Correct.
issues. Yeah.
Yep.
So, yeah, it's interesting because if they had followed some kind of, like you said, guardrails, they wouldn't have had that same issue. But yeah.
Yeah, and there's a group called Common Cause. I don't know if
Mhm.
you've ever heard of it. They've been around for years, and what they do is they started out sort of looking at media and reviewing media products like TV and movies, and then so that parents could look them up and sort of see, is this a good product or not, and is it
Yeah.
appropriate for children? I'm just trying to make sure I have the the name right. I think it is Common Cause, yeah. And so they've actually just released a very good study on chatbots and children, and they sort of devised a whole set of prompts trying to, see what the chatbots would do, and it's not good, And like for instance, on the topic of suicide, I think only one of the chat bots had sort of guardrails up um, that would do something about that, right?
Hmm.
And but even that you could get around. But the other two, if you talked about suicide, it was happy to talk about killing yourself and might even encourage you to do so.
Hmm.
So, and then they had other topics that really weren't appropriate for children that the chatbots completely uh, engaged in with no issues.
Yeah. I mean, m like kind of intersecting with this topic of guardrails, you've created a framework and love to discuss it surrounding the metaverse, which is a
Yes.
similar world type scenario. So yeah,
Right.
what can you tell us about that?
Well, because of what I witnessed in Second Life, when there seemed to be incredible interest in and VR and new virtual worlds that would be in VR, I thought it might be a good time to do a code of ethics for the metaverse because the metaverse would include Second Life, but it would also and video games, but it would also include um, things like Meta, right? And
Mm,
so, so what I did is, sort of call on all the research I'd done in Second Life and all the time I'd spent there, and then come up with sort of seven core principles that I feel like, and I tried to write it in a way that I had sort of two groups in mind. The people who own the universe, right? That deploy it, the developer, the company, but also users, because
Oh,
it's sort of two sides of an equation, right? It's just like Second Life. You can behave nicely to other people or poorly, and that's up to you. It's not up to the platform. But the platform, I think, also has some responsibility in terms of protecting people. So these seven principles, for instance, one's about privacy, and that has everything to do with the company trying to protect people's privacy and make sure that it doesn't get breached in any way.
yeah. I mean, that's interesting because I think privacy intersects with a lot of these, not just worlds, but also, I guess, social media, um, corporations, things like that, where the privacy policies have just been getting longer and longer and harder to digest as a user. But yeah, I do agree that some of the responsibility also lies on the user themselves.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, to your point, these terms of service that they ask us to read that are pages of legalese, they don't have to do that. They could summarize it, and some companies do, but not enough. They could summarize it in four or five key points and let you agree or disagree, opt in or not. And one of those is, does who owns your data? Information about you. Does the company own it, and are they going to resell it, or do you control your data? And the other thing is, in terms of privacy, is in terms of your information that you're putting in there, what are they going? Yeah, what are they going to use it for? Are they going to sell it? How long are they going to keep it? How long can they keep it secure? You know, because we've seen so many breaches of companies where the data gets leaked and then it gets all put on the dark web, and yeah, it can be a real disaster.
Yeah. I think the biggest one I can remember is the 23andMe um data leak. Yeah.
Yes. Right, people's very private personal medical information.
hmm Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I feel like a lot of these issues are surrounding like the actual company themselves, but I feel like there's also a third, there's the company, the user, but there's also, I guess, the government or some kind of other policy maker that's
Yeah.
responsible for setting those rules.
No, I think that's a great point. Is what is the government role in terms of governing these companies and putting down again guardrails or some kind of guidelines or laws, that they can't violate? And it's been kind of a mixed bag because I don't know if you've watched any of the hearings in Congress on some tech issues, but when you watch it, sometimes it's terrifying how little congressmen and senators know about technology. I mean, we're blessed. We live in an area, Silicon Valley, where we have congressional representatives and that really understand tech. And
hmm
so, but that's not the case across the country. And so, if we're going to regulate it, we want to make sure that there are good regulations and that they actually protect people. I would say California is a leader in regulation, in good regulation. And again, it should be given the amount of tech that happens here, that is created here.
Yeah. I mean, what kind of, I guess, policies would you hope to see, or are you already satisfied with surrounding tech and like the use of tech in general?
Well, I think there should be some protections for children for sure.
hmm
I think this thing with generative AI, these chatbots, where first of all, they don't have age restrictions, some of them, and then, as we already mentioned, there's no safety check, there's no guardrail, there's no where to report something horrible that happens. That could easily be regulated and with very heavy consequence. Right now, the only recourse for people there was a child, I believe, in the UK who committed suicide, and his parents are suing the chatbot company.
hmm
But a lawsuit shouldn't be the only legal recourse. And if there were more strict restrictions on what these companies could do, especially in regard to children, I think it could be super helpful.
Yeah. I mean, that's a massively important point because I think that's also what I think like a lot of new policies have come up around it. I know Spotify is starting to roll out new things, Instagram.
Yep.
Yeah, I think the lawsuit you're referring to might have been the same company, the character AI company. But
Yep.
yeah, it's interesting.
Yep.
Yeah, but I guess stepping away from policy and then towards the actual companies themselves, how can companies who are developing products kind of figure out how to build responsible tech? Like, what are some kind of key points in this framework that can be applied to any company?
Yeah, I think, if you there almost every company has put out some kind of responsible AI policy.
Yeah.
And some are good, some are not so great. Um, you know, I'd say the things that are the good companies, the companies that do it best, to be honest, have an ethics team.
Hmm.
They have taken the time. I think 10 years ago, maybe 11, I wrote a editorial in USA Today that said every tech company should have a chief ethicist. At that time, not one company had an ethics team or a chief ethicist. That's changed. Now some companies have built ethics teams. Google has an ethics team, Microsoft, IBM, and some of them are quite good. So that would be the first step is to actually hire somebody, hire a group of people who actually are passionate about it. Then I think, and they have to have the power to affect change. It can't just be sort of a token ethicist over here who we listen to pontificate, but we don't really pay attention to anything they're saying. I think the other thing is you have to, it should reflect any kind of policy you have should reflect your core values. And so for all these companies, what are your core values? I think Google's core value for a while was do no harm, which is
Hmm.
not really enough. Who is Google and who do they want to become and how are they affecting people? They could sit
Yeah.
down and draft with either help from the Markkula Center or many other smart people a set of core values that would sort of guide all their decisions in terms of what business they're going to get into and what they're not going to get into, right?
Yeah.
So I think having core values and an ethics team go a long way towards then developing responsible AI policy. You know,
Mhm.
uh, Salesforce has a world-class ethics team that has developed really good policies for workforce, but not every company has, and especially the startups often don't think about ethics, and it's too bad because that would be the perfect time to think
Yeah.
about ethics.
Right at the beginning. Yeah.
Exactly. And if you have your core values, then that would help guide you every step of the way. Stanford runs this big Y incubator. I've been trying to get into that for 7 years to
Hmm.
teach ethics to the young entrepreneurs and founders of companies. And they've
Yeah.
shown zero interest, which is too bad
Wow.
because we could really help all those entrepreneurs think about it at a very early level.
Yeah. I mean, I'm massively interested in entrepreneurship and, the concept of starting new things. And yeah, I think it's an important point that like you shouldn't think about ethics as an afterthought after you've already built your whole product up. It should be something that you start with. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, I don't want to take up too much of your time, obviously. So I will ask you, is there any kind of final thoughts or message you want to leave with the audience or advice for them if they're trying to get into this field?
Well, the definitely you can visit the Markkula Center website, which is
Yeah.
just we're at Santa Clara University, so it's just www.scu.edu ethics/ethics. Or if you just put in Markkula Center, you'll find us. We'll come up very easily in a Google search. We have tons of research and resources available, and it's aimed towards the general public. It's not aimed towards academics. So we
Mhm.
have lots of case studies for high school students, for college students, for lay people. We have lots of guidelines and articles. We cover 9 different areas from tech ethics to business ethics, bioethics, journalism ethics. So there's something there
Cool.
for everybody. So what we try to do is be a great resource for people that are curious about ethics and want to learn more.
That's amazing. I'm so glad that you also make it available to everyone. And I think that's a great ending note for this conversation. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, very impressive what you're doing here. Great job. Keep up the good
Thank
work.
you. Thank you so much, Dr. Hyder.